Welcome to the Art Business Podcast, a new episode. I'm David Bellingham, the Programme Director of the Master's Degree in Art Business at Sotheby's Institute of Art in London. And today we return to a subject close to our hearts. This is the evolving landscape of Ukrainian art and the Ukrainian art world and its markets in wartime. And we're privileged to be joined again by Bohdan Mysiuha. I'm sure I've mispronounced that, Olena.
It's fine.
Okay. Bohdan is a curator, art historian, and currently the art director at the Mercury Center for Intellectual Art in Lviv. And we're also honored to welcome back my MA Art Business alumna, Olena Grubb, to the conversation. And she had originally joined us during the recording, the original recording, as Bohdan's interpreter. And she's going to be interpreting for him today, and is herself a seasoned art business expert, not only with her master's from Sotheby's Institute of Art in Art Business, but also a track record in both law and cultural entrepreneurship. So she's also a publisher. She brings insight and clarity to the episode. So welcome, Olena.
Thank you very much, David, for inviting us. It's a great pleasure to be here and to support this important conversation.
And welcome, Bohdan.
Thank you, David. I'm very pleased to be here again.
Okay, so we're going to begin by noting a discernible shift amongst prominent Ukrainian art collectors towards prioritizing national art. This trend is not solely rooted in patriotism, as we might cynically think, but reflects a recognition of the intrinsic quality and cultural importance of their artwork, in contrast to the often repetitive themes prevalent in the global art market, particularly at mainstream art fairs. Ukrainian art presents a distinct and meaningful alternative. We then consider the development of early Ukrainian modernism, which emerged swiftly amid wartime and rapid technological change. And the present moment can be understood as a recurrence of this historical dynamic, with Ukraine once again situated at the nexus of significant transformation. I think it's unfortunate that we often see these things happening in times of war. I'd like to start by inviting Bohdan to reflect on his work in recovering and documenting lesser-known Ukrainian modernists and non-conformist artists, and to share his role as an interpreter of this historical moment. Over to you, Bohdan and Olena.
Богдане, я швидко просто скажу, що Девід представив початок нашої розмови і якраз розповів про те, що Україна зараз проходить через такий серйозні трансформації, в тому числі і позитивні. На жаль, це також все в акомпанементі з війною, але він якраз хотів би запросити вас прорефлексувати над вашою роботою по віднайденню та документуванню не завжди знаного в світі українського модернізму і також мистецтва нонконформістів, про яке теж світу мало відомо, і поділитися вашою ролью в якості підприємця, в якості такого перекладача для сьогоднішньої епохи цих важливих історичних моментів.
Я в принципі, все розумію. Я думаю, що, може, скоротимо нашу розмову до того, що я буду просто відповідати. Дякую. Я колись, знаєте, я півжиття провів в державних музеях.
Half of my life I spent in state museums.
І півжиття я боровся з стереотипами.
And half of my life I was fighting stereotypes.
Тому що всі експозиції державних музеїв залежали від ідеології.
Because all the exhibition in state museum, some sort of ideology would serve to some sort of ideological ideas.
Відповідно, українці ніколи не мали правдивої історії розвитку свого мистецтва. Вона завжди була виконана.
So there was no independent museum of history of Ukrainian art. It always was the exposition, the museum were always serving a particular purpose. So we're saying one side or the other.
Це власне причина, чому українське мистецтво дуже довгий час не було помітним на Заході, і чому воно до сих пір не є суб'єктним. Це
And this is
причина.
why this is the reason why Ukrainian art was not noticeable in the West and did not get kind of like subjectivity of presence or kind of a character that would be it would be recognized by.
Рік після того, як я відкрив музей модернізму, рік після того в світі з'явився дуже багато виставок. Український модернізм у вихрі бурі, здається, так воно називалося. І всі зрозуміли, що перевідкриття першої третини ХХ століття, тобто підхід аналітичний, він змінив дуже сильне ставлення до України. От. І я продовжую це далі, тому що модернізм – це тільки початок руйнування стереотипів. От. І зараз моя нова праця в Центрі інтелектуального мистецтва «Меркурій», де вже залучені приватні інвестиції. Просто під час війни приватні інвестиції дають більше можливостей. От, бо культура є більш обернена на збереження, на preserving. От, і, власне, зараз для того, щоб робити українську культуру суб'єктною, треба більше, масштабніші кроки, чим я і займаюся.
So from the moment when I opened the Museum of Modernism in Lviv, 1 year after that, there was an exhibition that was called In the Eye of a Storm, also ran by very serious gallerists and art historians in the West. I think it was James Batterwick project together with a lot of museums. It started, I was in the first one in Spain. I visited it. It was very nice. But so Bohdan was saying it was kind of all these movements began simultaneously. Understanding that the history of Ukrainian art of the beginning of the 21st century was actually not very well known, but was quite prominent and important. And so later on, now what Bohdan is doing, he's continuing this within the new art center that is called Mercury. And this art center is privately financed because during the war it's much easier to have access to financing and to operate within the private institution. And that is a Ukrainian investment. It's individuals or Ukrainian business supports that. And this is what he's doing now within this institution because it's very state funding is obviously halted, as you would know, that all the aid goes towards the war effort.
That's fascinating. I mean, that as a kind of business model in times of war, that's so interesting. And it's very heartwarming to feel that, Ukrainian citizens with capital, privileged people with money are willing to invest in this new center. So you launched the Mercury Center for Intellectual Art since we last spoke, I believe. So you told us about the kind of how it's who's investing in it as a private institution. Maybe you could expand on what the vision of this was, and maybe in comparison to what we spoke about before, which was the revisiting of Ukrainian modernism, which, as you say, Ukrainians themselves, but also the rest of the world wasn't aware of the importance of Ukrainian modernism. I think that's also true of a lot of other, dare I say, like post-Soviet countries. I have a dissertation student I was talking to yesterday who's very, very interested in this, and he wants to do his dissertation on Armenia. And the fact that their art world and their art markets and their artistic tradition isn't very well known in Western discourses. So this is a really interesting topic. So I guess the first question might be this Mercury Center for Intellectual Art. Am I right in saying that this is a way that Bohdan can address what's happening now, as opposed to what's happening, if I may say it, with dead artists from modernism?
Богдане, зрозуміли ви, чи трошки допомогти вам?
Більш-менш. Я просто хотів Не хочу пробувати читати, так, я думаю, що краще перекласти. Гасло нашого центру – це мистецтво візуалізує світогляд.
The motto of our center is that art, як ви сказали, мистецтво,
Мистецтво візуалізує світогляд.
art
Тому мистецтво
is
дає візуальну картину світогляду.
that the art gives a visual picture of the worldview. It visualizes the worldview.
Є. Війна загострила дуже багато протиріч в нашому суспільстві.
And the war has sharpened a lot of already existing conflicts in our society. You know, like tensions. Sometimes the society have just general tensions and that are existing, but the war is actually making them a little bit more, made them more dramatic.
До війни в публічних наративах було дуже багато брехні про нас, про нашу культуру і наш світогляд.
Before the war, in the mass media or general, there was a lot of narratives which were untrue about our culture and our worldview. We didn't pay much attention to that.
Я маю таке переконання, що в мистецтві правду приховати неможливо.
But my personal view that you cannot hide truth in art.
Мистецтво завжди говорить про світогляд своїх авторів.
Because the art always speaks the worldview of the authors, of the artists.
І коли ми відкрили, це була наша перша виставка, коли ми відкрили ретроспективу, яка називалась «Інтелектуальне мистецтво України», і це було в лютому 24-го року.
In February 2022, we have opened a retrospective. There was the first exhibition in the Mercury Art Center, a retrospective that was called Intellectual Art of Ukraine.
І це був культурний шок для всіх, тому що
And it was a
українці
cultural shock for everyone.
Українці вперше побачили реальну картину мистецьких процесів, а закордонні глядачі відкривали для себе іншу мистецьку Україну.
Because it was a shock for both Ukrainians themselves. They didn't realize that this is what we actually had. And as well as for the audience abroad who we showed the exposition and people were shocked.
Presumably shocked in a good way.
Шоковані в хорошому сенсі.
Yes.
Surprised at
Surprise.
I'm surprised.
May I just interrupt the flow a little bit, and I just wanted to kind of rewind a little and ask why you decided on this title. Is Mercury the company that's investing, or is Mercury being chosen for another reason? To me, as a classicist, Mercury is a god of quick wit and speed and communication. But I assume is it the sponsor's name, Mercury, or is it an intellectual idea to use this name of this classical god?
Богдане, бо Девід є класицистом, він є професор класичної літератури. А його цікавить, чому і Меркурій?
Чому Меркурій? Перш за все, нас фінансує велика корпорація, яка торгує цукром, зерном. Це велика корпорація, куди входять великі агропідприємства. Але наш інвестор сам за освітою прикладний математик. Це людина з інтелігентної родини.
We are financed, as you have correctly said, by a very big corporation, Ukrainian corporation. It's an agricultural giant that trades in sugar, wheat, because Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe now, all the world knows. But so we have a lot of agribusiness. And so these are a major sponsor. And the man in charge of this company, by his training, is a mathematician.
Але головна причина інша. Головна причина та, що будинок, який ми купили, і ми скоро до нього переїдемо, це великий будинок в центрі Львова, де колись Був збудований спочатку торгова палата, а потім готель для залізниці. І на горі цього будинку стоїть статуя з Меркурієм.
Ах,
Цьому
ясно.
будинку вже 180 років. Тут був, скажімо так, тут був перший готель австрійської залізниці, яку будував ще Франц Йосиф. Ну, тобто це
So the plan for the building, because they before the war they planned to renovate a property that is 180 years old in the center of Lviv, that used to be the first hotel of Austro-Hungarian railway. And the railway in Lviv, Lviv was a part of Austro-Hungarian Empire at that point, and so we had this Austrian, buildings together with the railway station, and together with the various hotels belonging to the railway. And then this particular building was also торгова палата, like a trade, kind of like an exchange, like a trade exchange, like a stock exchange. It became as a stock exchange. And on top of that building is a big statue of the god Mercury. And before the war, they were planning to quickly renovate and actually open there. But because of the war, they couldn't do it. So they now are located in a very big also building of former bank in the center. And they are still in the process of renovation, the Mercury building, and they will be associated with the statue.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I mean, Mercury in London is a symbol of some banks as well. You still see it in some of the buildings from some of the like 19th century established bank buildings. So yeah, it's quite interesting actually. In classical mythology, Mercury is many things, but he's also a god of banking. He's a god of banking. And I think it's associated with like the word merchant, if I remember rightly. But he's also associated with the god of theft, which always
Yes.
amuses me.
Part of the trade, it's like it's very Eastern concept where trade is also theft. If you look, because I lived in the East a little bit in Istanbul and all these Eastern countries, it's always association, the market, which is the traditional, this bazaar of the Eastern bazaars. Half of that is a lot of theft as well. So you need to be thrifty, thefty, and trady. You stole the
Exactly.
lemon at one place, you rent to the other, sold it, and that's part of business.
Absolutely, absolutely. Anyway, it's a great name I think, for a gallery that is also about communication across the world. It kind of work. I always think these mythological symbols are so rich and they're multi-semantic, like good art. We can't. I don't know whether it might be interesting if Bohdan agrees with me. When people ask me what is my definition of good art, one of my criteria is it has to be readable on lots of different levels, often conflicting. It's multi-semantic in the way that a poet will use a words that we can discuss forever. Did he mean this? Did he mean that? Or did she mean this? Did she mean that? And my response will always be, that's the beauty of it. It's ambiguous, it has all those meanings together. I don't know whether Bohdan would agree with that viewpoint. In visual art as well.
Богдане, чи ви погодитесь Девід запропонував, що його таке визначення хорошого мистецтва – це те, що воно може інтерпретуватися як в поезії, так? Тобто воно метафоричне, це може бути одна фраза, яка безконечно може пояснювати мільйон явищ, воно не втомлюється говорити з людьми різними мовами, так? Як завгодно, якимись світоглядами. Чи ви погодитеся з таким поглядом на хороше мистецтво?
I think so. True art never have a distance.
Скажіть українською.
I think area of true art it's so big. I think board in the middle of true art of different countries never been. Yeah.
Скажіть ще раз, скажіть українською, пан Богдан.
Я просто думаю, що правдиве мистецтво, воно не має кордонів інтерпретації. Е,
Art does not have borders for interpretation, does not have interpretational borders. He would agree with you, yes.
і правдиве мистецтво, воно не має своєї території.
And true art does not have territory either.
Yeah,
It's not
because I
territorial.
think Bohdan will know what I'm talking about. A lot of my academic peers who are art historians and art critics, it always seems to me that they try and define an exhibition or an artist very much by a flag that they recognize, and just a single flag. Whereas I've actually researched and written about this in historical art myself. It's all about multiple meanings, multiple, the work of art can vary depending on the viewer and enriches their experience through having these conflicts. So I think part of my experience of good art is that it argues with me. So I say, oh, that's what this means. And and then I kind of go back to it and I think, oh, the work of art is kind of almost disagreeing with that reading of itself. It's now saying, actually, I'm something different. Um,
Девід, Девід каже, що так, що мистецтво, ну це дуже часто люди махають прапором, так, але він каже, наприклад, я і багато робив досліджень, і багато писав про це, так, що мистецтво з нами розмовляє, воно може зі мною сперечатися. Дуже часто, коли я бачу підпис, навіть що стоїть країна чи ще щось, мені таке здається, що цей художник на картині хочеться заперечити взагалі, що, ну так, що так його вже...
Я думаю, що дуже доречно буде вам сказати про один випадок, який в нас стався 2 тижні тому.
Very good. I have a very good example to illustrate something that you were just talking about.
Ми відкрили виставку 2 художників, і ця виставка називається «Раціо», що в перекладі з грецького означає «усвідомлений порядок».
We have just recently opened an exhibition, and the name of the exhibition, the title of the exhibition is Ratio, which is from the Greek, is order, is I think it is order, logical order, isn't it? Ratio.
yeah, sorry, I was muted. Yeah, no, you're quite right.
І особливість в чому? Тому що це художники, в яких дуже глибоко відчувається архетип.
These are the artists that have a very deep, that from the paintings of which you can very deeply see the archetypes.
І це основа їхньої простоти.
And this is the basis of the simplicity of their art. It's an archetypical art that you can see the simplicity and this archetypical things.
Але водночас в цих картинах є дуже багато символів віртуальної епохи.
But the interesting thing that in this art, I can see personally a lot of symbols of our virtual epoch, yeah, of our times of virtuality.
І один з відвідувачів подивився на композицію круглу, яка зроблена з таких кольорових цяток, і сказав, та це ж є Дем'ян Херст, це не... Але це була Тамара Гридяєва.
We had a painting that was round and it has a lot of dots, colorful dots. And one of the visitors who came said, well, this is Damien Hirst. This is the same thing. Although this was a lady called Tamara Гридяєва. Як прізвище?
Гридяєва.
Гридяєва. Tamara Гридяєва, she's a Ukrainian female artist.
І особливість в чому? Оці круги Тамари Гридяєвої, вони називаються круглі сади.
The trick is that those circles of Tamara Гридяєва, the artists, are done with the idea of gardens. The shapes were the gardens.
І тут захований архетип наших древніх поселень в Трипіллі давньому, де в центрі був вогонь і навколо було поселення хатів. І це підсвідома форма.
And it is a reflection on a Ukrainian archetype when a long time ago, before the statehood, we lived as a tribe. There was a culture called Tripillian culture, and that was before the Scythians So we had this also very less known, the traditional cultures that were on our territory. One of them was called Tripilla culture, that is very ancient people. And then the symbol, it was people lived in kind of around little villages, and in the middle there was a fireplace or the live fire, and then there's houses around it, and it was her archetypical sort of reflection on that.
Ці круглі крапки, які є в Деміна Херста, ідея походить в його конфлікті з індустрією таблеток. І кожна крапля – це в нього таблетки. Але навіть в Деміна Херста, в тій композиції, ці круглі, також є архетип Стоунхенджу. Тобто також архетип древніх поселень британців. От. Тому, архетипи нікуди не сховаєш. Тобто...
Я зрозуміла вас. So the Bohdan's idea is saying, but for example, in Damien Hirst, we know that on a rational level, the explanation of his artworks, where the circle with the dots, is all about the pills and his conflict with the medical industry, and we know the narrative that has been given to us. But in Bohdan's understanding, this is also, you cannot hide your archetype, and he connects us with, for example, the Stone Age and the ancient people who lived on the territory of Britain, and a lot of ancient, it's a lot of ancient archetypes that are cross-territorial, and the narratives written on exhibition may be one thing, but you cannot conceal something much deeper that coming out. And that is an example about no territory for any of those explanations, whatever you know, as you said, interpretations.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that, and I can think of an example in London. Bridget Riley, best known, you all know Bridget Riley, and best known for her kind of like op art works. She was recently commissioned by the National Gallery to do a mural in the one of the new entrances to the gallery, and in some redecoration. And basically you walk in and you immediately think, oh, she's copied Damien Hirst. There are these large colored circles all over the walls of the staircase that you walk up. So yeah, you think, oh, this is Damien Hirst, but you know, I think it's an example where you need to know her backstory. So basically she's referring to it's site specific. She's referring to one of the works in one of the latest works in the National Gallery, which kind of stops with Impressionism, post-Impressionism, and then later than that goes to Tate, of course. But she was referring to the pointillism of Seurat, apparently. But also she labels the work Messengers, which relates to another earlier artist in the National Gallery collection, John Constable, the British Romantic landscape painter, where he calls clouds messengers. So actually, it's an example really of where my naive response when I saw these is, oh, she's just imitated Damien Hirst. But then when I realized what she intended by her dots, and I'm sure it was a postmodern deliberate play on Damien Hirst's work, I'm sure of that. But actually, it refers to the history of the gallery. You know, an earlier work, and one of the most, you know, modern works by Seurat's, you know, involving his pointillism. And the other thing I think that you were referring to ancient examples. So there's a lot of early cave paintings where the artists apparently filled their mouth with pigments and water, and they used a kind of strange straw, and they used their lips, and they projected it into dots. So there's that kind of dot painting, almost Damien Hirst style, even in cave paintings in antiquity. And I agree with Bohdan that I'm sure all these artists aren't stupid. They're very historically rooted as well. So I think that they're expecting us to read all those historical aspects of their style into the work as well as their new intended meaning.
Богдане, чи зрозуміли ви так, що він говорить, що навіть в давнину люди так мали таку соломку в старовинні культури, так набирали пігмент в рот і такі робили теж такі, випльовували ці фарби в формі кола, і цей пуантилізм, можна сказати, імпресіонізм печерний. Так, що художники дуже розумні люди, і того не
Основне,
приховають.
що я хотів донести оцим прикладом, про те, що ми маємо британське мистецтво, яке інституалізоване,
Угу.
і воно суб'єктне, воно вписано в світовий контекст. І коли ми бачимо форми британського мистецтва, ми їх набагато швидше пізнаємо.
Угу.
Тобто вони локалізуються
Я перекладу.
в просторі набагато швидше, ніж наші. Чому? Тому що ми не маємо своєї інституційної сторінки в світовому мистецтві.
Угу.
І тут це дуже дуже виклик, та? І це виклик нашого центру також. Ми би хотіли.
Bohdan is making, he said the point I'm also trying to make here is that, for example, British art has its what he calls subjectivity, subjective self. It has a certain personality. It has its history. It has its standing in the art world, and in which point we do recognize British art, and we can read British art. There's enough written, and then we can enjoy it as well, and kind of follow it development. This is something that I am trying to do with the Ukrainian art and with the Center of Mercury, because our history was during the Soviet times was concealed or shredded, and people were working underground. So for many other reasons, it didn't get that sort of
exposure.
Yes. And so this is one of the big challenges that Bohdan is putting for himself and for the center.
That's brilliant. Yeah. So just in terms of, as this is called the Art Business Podcast, I was just riffing on what Bohdan has said about these dots and my response. Of course, in terms of the art market, it's a very easy and recognizable symbol, colored dots. And one of the things Damien Hirst was very good as a kind of almost like a business artist is creating a brand for himself that he can then create lots of original paintings that are going to make him a lot of money, but also lots of multiples that he signs. They're all recognizable. I mean, when I walk through my hometown in London in Kew, I even see prints, large ones of Damien Hirst dot paintings, as you say, based on medicine. On people's walls, and they're proud to have them, and they always put them in their front room so you can see them in their room. So it's a recognizable brand, the dots as well. Anyway, maybe changing another question. I was just going to return to the Museum of Modernism. What might have evolved in the Museum of Modernism in the last few years since we last spoke? Have there been any changes, any new exhibitions that the listeners would like to hear about?
Пане Богдане, що з музеєм модернізму?
Музей модернізму насправді дуже сильно змінив картину історії львівського мистецтва.
Museum of Modernism can make a statement and has changed the scenery of the Lviv art scene.
Його не закрили, але він відкритий тільки 3 дні в тижні через брак фінансування державної культури.
It is open only 3 days a week. At the moment, it is difficult to finance the culture because of the war, and it is very the finance for the culture are very tightly used. So unfortunately, it's only open 3 days a week at the moment.
Музей модернізму змінив розстановку на арт-ринку, тому що модернізм почали колекціонувати. І останній наш третій аукціон, якого я був куратором, ми продали 18 лотів авторів, які є в музеї модернізму.
So Museum of Modernism, actually opening of that museum, we had a lot of visitors. I mean, I was among one of the visitors. I specifically came. I lived in Istanbul at that point, and it was incredible. And Bohdan was doing this wonderful curatorial tours, one after another. I don't know how he did it all day, every day. But then it changed the situation on the market profoundly, because after the war, when they opened the Mercury Center, Bohdan had about 3 auctions of art now. And on the third auction, they had 18 lots of the artists who were presented in the Museum of Modernism. Not the same works, but of the same artists. He said we sold them very well. People collecting the local modern art, now they are educated. And that's what we started talking about, that people prefer their own art and when they're getting to know about it.
Oh, that's very interesting. Sorry, that's very interesting. Like for my students, because we talk, as you know, Olena, we talk about the importance of being represented in a museum, and the problems for a lot of emerging artists that have gone huge at auction and on in commercial galleries, but art galleries haven't, validating galleries haven't purchased their work. And it seems to me that with the Museum of Modernism, it's almost like the reverse of that, that as Bohdan has said, Ukrainian modernism wasn't really recognized internationally in a big way. And that new museum is enabling people to recognize it. And that immediately validates the works in the museum and the artists in the museum internationally. And then local people in particular are going to suddenly see cultural value, but also some financial value in buying works by the same artist. It's a very interesting business model, that links cultural and financial values.
Пане Богдане, дуже хороша модель, де коментує про те, що яка поєднує фінансову, я не хочу казати вартість, мабуть, ну і культурну теж не вартість, а більше культурну важливість і фінансову важливість поєднує. Ось те, що ви сказали.
Я, власне, хотів сказати, що як з'явилася модель Меркурія. Я приблизно 20 років займаюся дослідженням мистецтва нонконформістів. І коли аукційний дім Дукат робив великий інформаційний ресурс на сайті Ukrainian Official Art, тобто я був куратором львівської частини. І я знаю, як після цього ресурсу зросли ціни на нонконформізм. Тобто це була перша модель. Друга модель – це був музей модернізму.
Я перекладу, щоб ми почали. So he said that I've learned about this model by my own kind of example and observation, really, because I was working for 20 years. My research interest is Ukrainian non-conformist art, and which is during the Soviet time, the people who didn't conform with the narratives, who were doing alternative things. And he was making the research, and then the Ukrainian auction house in Kiev called Dukat was doing this informational resource online about Ukrainian artists and arts, and Bohdan was invited to do a part for Lviv artists. And when they have published the information about the Lviv nonconformist artists, the one that Bohdan was researching and writing about, he said the prices and demand for this art suddenly rose dramatically. And this is the first time that he, just by his own eyes, he observed the difference that he made. And then this was the first he said it was the first model of the kind of a primitive art market. And then the second one was the Museum of Modernism, where he took it to another level to also check again, but this was a cooperation with the State Museum, because Museum of Modernism is a part of the Lviv National Gallery of Art. And so he was actually trying to make a proper collection for that museum. But these artworks are still in private hands, not the one that are owned by the museum, but other works are available and people started buying them. And then the third model, now he is with the Center Mercury, which he made it completely private.
Interesting.
Ну, і, власне, бачите, розмова зайшла дуже добре. От.
It's a very good conversation, because it is an art business podcast indeed.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a slightly uncomfortable question, mainly, maybe, but the traditional kind of like, UK public museums are the people who are appointed as curators are not really meant to have anything to do with money in the market. And they would kind of they would avoid any implication that by purchasing a work by like a living artist that they're somehow supporting their market. I wonder how where Bohdan and maybe Ukrainian, do they think differently? Are they being more pragmatic and realizing that actually it's good to have this relationship with art collecting, private art collectors, and does Bohdan feel that that creates which in my opinion, I believe, he can disagree with me, but because like a lot of public gallery curators and like orthodox art historians in the UK, I work for a private institution which is related to the auction house and the market, obviously, so I have different views, but they don't like talking about money and linking art to that. I just wonder where Bohdan sits, and maybe is this typical of Ukrainians in general? After all, the Mercury Foundation has been sponsored by private money.
Пане Богдане, ну загалом питання так етичності. Він каже, мені незручно, це таке трошки незручне питання, але я б хотів його обговорити, бо мені цікаво. Ось з питанням грошей, бо в нас в Великобританії це є в ортодоксальній музеї, так вважаю, що це є неетично, що куратор має взагалі якийсь зв'язок з ринком чи з якимось фінансовим, що він там про гроші думає, чи запрошує якихось приватних колекціонерів. Але я особисто працюю на приватну інституцію, так само як ви, так, на аукціонний будинок. І в мене трошки інший погляд на цю тему. Я би хотіла запитатися у вас, як це в Україні, тобто чи це окей для державного музею мати кураторів, які якось стараються і ринку вгодити, чи ви теж такі, виключення, скажімо, які ваші погляди на це?
Коли я працював в державних музеях, я не контактував з ринком.
When I was working for State Museum, I was not contacting the market. I was not dealing in artworks or anything.
Я був виключно експертом. Тобто я працював як, тобто користувались, очевидно, користувались моєю експертністю. Мене питали...
We called it in museum, ви були науковий співробітник.
Так, як правило. Тобто я був куратор, інституалізований куратор. Наприклад, куратори зараз в Україні діляться на дві частини. Є інституційні, які працюють з інституціями і працюють з матеріалами інституції, а є вільні куратори, так? Тобто незалежні. Я був інституційним куратором практично все життя.
There are institutional curators and independent curators. All my life I was institutional curators who worked for the museum. I had a scientific research that I was doing, and this is I didn't have anything to do. I was not even thinking about that these works could be sold because this is a type of art that no one knew about.
І проблема є в тому, що оце створення музейних колекцій, воно також було фальшивим державних колекцій, тому що не було правдивої аналітики.
But I think that composition of the collections for State Museum is not or was not in Ukraine. He's talking about the situation, in his opinion, that was happening in Ukraine was not very fair because there was no analytical background behind it.
Власне, коли оцей музей модернізму, це був перший випадок, коли я зруйнував стереотипи, так? І зараз під час війни стало дві проблеми. Одна проблема, а хто буде створювати цей наратив, хто буде створювати нові цінності, тому що музей модернізму – це тільки початок історії, а треба створювати ті цінності, які були після модернізму. А музей зараз не має фінансування. Тобто музей не спроможний фінансувати добрих кураторів державний музей, він не має коштів на масштабні експозиції, він не має коштів на дослідження в майстернях, тому що це все ресурс, так?
And look, and okay, so I was doing that, and we were developing the non-conformist art, and then with the Museum of Modernism, I have actually broken this practice, and I have built a collection that was built on my research, and that had a fantastic narrative that I had 20 years of my work and research, and I could tell about every single work, and I knew the sources, and I went and researched the studios or the relatives of these people, and then this is what I thought, this ideally how I would like it to see. And then what happens next? Of course, this is modernism, it's only a start. This is something that I've done, and it's a tiny small part of the art history. And he says, like, what do we do after? We need to build the same things after modernism. He said, and that requires finance, because it requires research, it requires people looking into it. You need to, he said, it takes money. And then state museums cannot offer such thing, especially during the time of war. We had hopes maybe to attract some finances before, but during the war, this is unacceptable. Even people would probably not approve that. Like, for example, there are a lot of other needs on the front line, and then if the government will announce a massive funding of the art research, that would be not good for anybody. And so, Bohdan, так.
Ну і власне, коли я знайшов інвесторів для цього центру, в мене було 3 завдання. Перше завдання.
But I wanted to continue, and I found investors to create a separate center.
Перше завдання, яким чином ми будемо творити оці нові мистецькі наративи, тому що в мене величезна база даних, біля 8 тисяч експонатів. Це мої пройдені майстерні, мої польові дослідження, так звані, так, яких я хочу завести в історію мистецтва.
So the first question for me was, and to investors, I've presented, so the first challenge for me was, I have three main challenges that I had when I met the investors. And I've offered to them this idea. And I said, the first challenge is I have about 8,000 artworks that I have researched and that I have found, and I know where they are located, and they, I think, are worthy of exposition.
От, і виклик інвесторів, вони питають, як ми себе прогодуємо.
And the investors are asking, okay, that's very good, and but how are we going to finance ourselves with this? We can invest, but then how do we go on?
І тут є тільки 2 шляхи. Один шлях, ми робимо кожну виставку як велике шоу, і воно нам приносить 30% коштів.
We make each exhibition is a huge show. We put a lot of money into marketing and in press, and so we earn money from tickets and
І другий варіант, ми маємо в своїй інституції структуру, яка заробляє гроші на монетизації мистецтва.
Or we have, within the structure of this center, we have a separate company that is a commercial company that earns money by selling artworks.
I tell you what it reminds me of, actually, and it's a real shame because it's kind of disappeared now. And you both know Charles Saatchi as the person that encouraged and was the patron, really, of first major collector in this country of the YBAs. His gallery which is now in Sloane Square, it was the only gallery. I used to say to my students, I know that this guy collects this art, but it's the only gallery where in London we can see the work of emerging international artists. He would have an exhibition on Eastern European artists that we wouldn't otherwise see, because the public galleries can't afford to put these exhibitions on, and they're just not knowledgeable enough. An emerging Indian artist, Saatchi. So there was a kind of tension, really, between the fact that we were visiting, Olena will remember this, we were visiting Saatchi's gallery as seeing this amazing art by artists we would never otherwise see in London, and yet at the same time knowing that Saatchi owned those works. But now he's kind of stopped doing that. We can't see this anymore, other than in other than in unashamedly commercial galleries, small commercial galleries across London. I think it's a real loss. So I would say that what Bohdan's doing, he's doing two things. He's worked with the Museum of Modernism, which he quite rightly says he wasn't involved in any kind of market issues with that. And we all know that ICOM, the International Council of Museums, if you're going to be a member of that, people working in the museum can't have any involvement with with their own market that collecting. But that now he's actually done something which I think is really admirable. And as you say, the rationale in the Ukraine is that public money can't pay for this contemporary art. But actually, I would say that what he's doing with exposing these perhaps more emerging Ukrainian living artists is something we still don't have in London, because galleries like Tate, they have to be very they have very little public money, so they have to be very careful which emerging artists they purchase, and they tend, in my opinion, they will often follow the market. And so if they see an artist suddenly selling for more and more on the international art market, they will then think, oh, this British artist we have to have in our national collection because they're being collected internationally. It's a paradox, really, of the way they're thinking about money and cultural value. So I totally understand where Bohdan is coming from there, and that these two things are very different models. But I only wish we had something like the Mercury Museum in London, which we don't have.
We should definitely cooperate. I mean,
Yeah.
and we could put some exhibition of the. Sorry, Bohdan, вибачте, I'm like talking on his behalf. I'm proposing here the exchange of exhibitions, that we bring some interesting, emerging British artists to Lviv, and we can bring some emerging Ukrainian artists to London.
I think that would be great, and no one, you see, they're probably not going to do that, the public museums, simply because they haven't got any. In this country, there's less and less money for the public money for the artists. I just wanted to, we could carry on talking about this. It's very interesting. One of the things we haven't really spoken about is internationalization of the Ukrainian artists. And I know you've had some international exhibitions like the one in Schmallenberg. Maybe you could talk about the importance of taking these artists and modernists and contemporary out of Ukraine and being shown in other countries like Schmallenberg in Germany.
Богдане, розкажіть трошки.
Я зрозумів. Understand, yeah. Ну, знаєте, виставка в Шмаленбергу, вона показала, як ставляться до українського мистецтва. Тобто до нього ставляться як до екзотики. Тобто це щось приїхало, воно цікаве. Єдина річ, що це дійсно було якісне мистецтво. І німецькі газети про це писали. І зрозуміло, що це була виставка, яка приїхала місяць після початку Великої війни. Зрозуміло, що вона мала благодійну мету. От.
The exhibition in Schmallenberg came up as a little bit of a exotic for the German art world. And of course, because it's arrived 1 month after the beginning of the war. So we were planning before, and then so it of course turned into having a charitable cause.
І я думаю, що от коли вже півроку після нашої виставки, коли в експозиційні площі зайшло дуже багато українського мистецтва, в тому числі і інституційного, з державних галерей, тому що, наприклад, Львівська картинна галерея вивезла всю свою збірку до Польщі, до Прибалтики, і Львівська картинна галерея зробила зі своєї збірки такий великий європейський тур.
And then, so after about 6 months, up to a year after our exhibition in Schmallenberg, Ukrainian art started touring around Europe, especially, for example, Lviv National Gallery, in a fear of invasion and further bombing, has sent all of this main collection to Poland. And from Poland, then they kind of went on a tour in a European museum offering that show. And not only that, but the Eye of a Storm, couple of private exhibitions, but institutions. So there was a lot of institutions who were involved. And
Ну і потім, якщо, наприклад, порівняти виставку родини Буднікових, це Володимир Будніков і Влада Ралко, так, це подружжя київське. От вони виїхали до Берліну місяць після того, як я з вами розмовляв тоді на подкасті.
Так.
Їхній успіх був набагато більший, тому що вони на берлінському середовищі це знані художники. Тобто вони співпрацюють з німецькими музеями, так? Тобто їхнє мистецтво сприймалося зовсім інакше. От, тобто не як екзотика, а тобто як суб'єкти, скажімо так, європейського арт-середовища. Ну, це зовсім інше було. Їхній меседж був доступніший для німців. Вони якраз виставили свій львівський щоденник. Вони, коли втікли від окупації, вони в нас опинилися в гостьовій кімнаті.
У вас
І
вдома?
Вони самі з Києва. Вони втікали з
А,
Києва, так. І Львівська картинна галерея їх примістила в гостьовій кімнаті. От. І вони в цій
so,
гостьовій кімнаті в Палаці Потоцьких малювали свої враження від початку війни. Так званий львівський щоденник. І їхня рефлексія потім зайшла в берлінський зал. Я перший був про це написав на Збручі, тобто я перший писав про їхню виставку. От. І я просто знаю, що тоді от їхній меседж, він дійшов до німців. Тобто, якщо в наш був такий, екзотика незрозуміла, так? Хоча в нас також були і теми війни, і теми етнічного якоїсь там окремішності, так?
так, так.
Влада Ралко і Будніков, вони навіть мовою німецькою говорять, візуальною, знаєте. Будніков дуже нагадує Базаліца, знаєте. От. Влада Ралко нагадує там інші такі виразні форми німецького експресіонізму. Тобто це український сегмент, але зрозумілий для аудиторії.
Для Німеччини. Перекладу. So, Bohdan is saying our exhibition, it was the first one there, and I think it was viewed a little bit more exotic and a little bit not fully understood. Maybe I have not chosen necessarily the right way to show or the right art to show. It was accepted very well, but although it was probably a little bit difficult to understand because it was a little bit about the war, a little bit about Ukrainian ethnicity or something, but so it was received with interest, but without a lot of sort of understanding and applause. But then months after that, we had, he was saying that a lot of artists were fleeing from the east as well. And he said, for example, the family, husband and wife, the artists, they're quite famous in Ukraine, Volodymyr Budnikov and Vlada Ralko, his wife. Lviv National Art Gallery has hosted them as basically because they didn't have place to live. So the Lviv Art Gallery hosted them in their the Lviv Art Gallery is based in a palace, in an old Austrian palace, and the palace has a dining room that is not used, obviously because it's a museum. And so they were located apparently in that dining room for some time because there was nowhere to live. People were, coming from all over the place. And they were making a visual diary of they called Lviv diaries from the beginning of war when they lived in that dining room of the old palace in the center of Lviv in the art gallery. And then after some time, they went to Berlin and they had an exhibition there, and they were received much better because they speak, their visual language is much more understandable to the German public, for example, and to the German scenery. And this Volodymyr Budnikov, he's a little bit like Baselitz, a little manner of drawing, and his wife is a little bit also reminding of like a little bit of German expressionism. It's a little bit kind of like this darker, in my opinion, ways. But he said that they were very well received and understood. And Bohdan is saying, I'm just observing that, and I kind of understand why you need to also speak the language of the local people, kind of be a little bit, what you present is a little bit more.
Yeah, because the Eye of the Storm, of course, came to the Royal Academy in London last year, and I believe also, I didn't attend it, unfortunately, but I believe there was a conference at the Courtauld Institute about international modernism that partly discussed Ukrainian modernism. I may be, if I remember rightly, I may be wrong about that.
No, there was a conference. Conference was because Ukrainian modernism was very much connected with the folk art at that time.
Yes,
So
yeah.
It was the conference about the connection of between the folk art and modernism and
Yeah, and that kind of I was talking about it with my student I mentioned earlier about Armenia. He was saying that a lot of the Soviet museums were actually about ethnographic collections,
ethnic.
folk art. Yeah, and I think that ideology sort of became part of a lot of other nations attached to the Soviet Union, as I
Yeah,
understand it.
it was a traditional colonialistic sort of
Mm, yeah.
model of state, but although it was a communist, so that failed tremendously. But the idea was the Russians are copying people, and so they were copying British, or they wanted to be an empire.
Mm,
And this is how they kind of there were 15 different separate countries who they after they occupied them in the 20th century called them these are our nations, you know, like within the
mm.
countries, the first people or something. And
Yeah,
so
exactly. No, I get that. Yeah. But
and
kind of,
we are the first people, but it was 20th century. It was very weird, you know, people who
yeah. And also, of course, anything like modernism was seen as something for the bourgeoisie and to be, which of which we've already spoken about to a certain extent. So you're kind of almost trying to like reposition the modernism of these former Soviet influenced at least territories in back into that kind of international modernism, which I think is wonderful. I just wanted to change the subject and think about education. I was just wondering if Bohdan could say something about his access to the Mercury, for example, and any educational work that is done in maybe bringing young people, not, yeah, I don't like the word young, but less experienced and school kids even, and maybe families into both mums and dads, into the Mercury. I wonder if you could talk about what kind of events they might put on, if any.
по освітніх програмах, пане Богдане, в Меркурії.
Я все зрозумів, так. Справа в тому, що моя перша освіта це педагог. Тобто я
My
викладаю.
first occupation is the teacher. I am a teacher by by my profession when I studied the university.
Mm.
І відповідно, мій весь педагогічний досвід це експерименти.
My
Тобто я ніколи
experience is experiments.
мені завжди не подобались навчальні програми.
I
Вони
never
завжди були
liked
застарі.
the standard study programs.
Вони завжди були застарі, вони відставали від часу, і я завжди це робив. Тобто я завжди їх руйнував. Я ніколи не викладав за державними програмами. І тому у мене завжди було дуже багато студентів, більше, ніж потрібно на парі.
I always had many more students that they were assigned to my class because I was saying something different than the program required.
Good. Отже, якщо підсумувати, я мав досвід викладання з 3 різними категоріями людей. Перші – це діти,
I had
наймолодші.
experience with 3 different categories of people. I had experience with children, small children.
І для них я створив спеціальну методику в музеї Корсаків в 19-му році.
And in the 2019, I created special methodology and methods for them. We have also another big private museum of Korsak. Korsak is also a very big business owner. Yeah, very big sponsor of arts.
В чому полягала суть цієї методики? Тобто я зруйнував міметичну схему. Тобто
I have the essence of this methodology that I have ruined яка схема?
Міметична система, зображення реальної дійсності, тобто академічна, скажімо так, стара академічна форма радянська.
We had this old Soviet sort of academic art where you're supposed to do realism, and he said I got rid of that.
Ідея полягала в тому, щоб малювати, не починати дітей вчити малювати складну конструкцію реалізму, а почати з візуалізації відчуттів. Так як це робить методика Монтессорі, так як це роблять канадійці, французи. Тобто це альтернативний підхід до навчання, це через візуалізацію людських відчуттів.
Mhm. So the first one that I've ruined, that for the small children, not to teach them immediately how to draw the vase, the complicated object with shading and everything, but rather to visualize their feelings. And this is kind of the method that is much more modern and used for a long time already everywhere.
Yeah, like a form of expressionism.
Та як форма експресіонізму.
І друга частина це була зі студентами. Я вважав, що зі студентами треба дуже швидко наздогнати всі еволюційні форми західного мистецтва, починаючи від Баухаусу і до хай-теку.
With the students, with older kids or students, young people, as we say, then for me was important to very quickly catch up with all the art processes of art history that we missed out, starting from Bauhaus and ending with the highly technological art of nowadays. So
that's commendable. So in other words, you're filling in all these gaps that went under Soviet systems. Yeah.
Ну і третє, я дуже хотів, щоб паралельно була методика, яка щитувала наративи сучасності і переводила їх в методику. Ну,
and
тобто,
the third, I wanted the method that would read the narratives of the current situation that we live in and would create its own methodology.
Ну і частково мені це вдалося в академії, але до певного часу, тому що далі мене заставили ці програми писати, їх затверджувати, а затвердження програми триває рік-півтора.
And then, yeah, and then
я постійно буду відставати.
Then when I started to introduce them in the Lviv Academy of Arts, it was very successful, but then they dragged me all into these bureaucratic things of write the program down and make the syllabuses and everything, and I understood that I'm just going to be behind if I'm going to be doing that.
Ну і третя категорія це звичайні відвідувачі наших виставок, які хочуть бачити за картинами світогляд. І це інша аудиторія, і вона потребує уваги.
And the third category of people are our visitors, just regular people who would like to see more what is behind the painting, let's say, the character and what we were talking about, narratives and everything. And this is a separate category that does requires attention.
І тому, власне, робота в нас в Меркурі як побудована? В нас є дві структури. Одна структура – це мистецький простір, де ми створюємо цінності. Я роблю те, що я робив в музеї. Я відкриваю нові імена, я відкриваю нові явища, і я заводжу їх в історію українського мистецтва. І є друга структура – аукційний дім. Тобто, який бере ці цінності з історії українського мистецтва і пробує їх монетизувати. Таким чином, люди, які приходять до нас на аукціон, вони розуміють, що вони контактують зі спеціалістами. Ну,
так.
Ось так.
Але він більше за освітні програми ще хотів.
Ну, я, власне, про це казав, що зараз в мене ще фокус додався тих людей, які приходять, тобто, це також освітня програма, але це освітня програма, це так званий лікбез.
Ваші кураторські екскурсії.
Так, це не тільки кураторські екскурсії, це є просто розмови про стилі, про мистецтво.
We have talks about the art, about the styles. And Bohdan is doing his curatorial tours that are absolutely fascinating, very interesting. And then what he's saying is that the center basically has two pillars. One pillar is the research center, which just a center like artistic practices, and this is what I was doing in the museums. I continue that, and I built people around it, and then the second one is auction house, which we trying to earn money from selling the art that we know about, and education is a part of that process, of course. When people are visiting, some people would potentially want to buy something, not necessarily from the exhibition, but from that artist too.
That's fantastic. We could carry on talking about this, but I'm aware of the time now. So I think that a fairly obvious sort of elephant in the room that we haven't spoken much about through the course of the podcasts. You know, when the invasion happened, the whole international world, this was on the news all the time. We hear less about it other than these talks that occasionally happen with Zelensky involved, and Putin isn't going to be there in Turkey. I'm sure and we kind of forget. I think a lot of people have. We feared this would happen, that would forget the day-to-day reality of living in a country during wartime. And I'd like to ask you, what would you say is the day-to-day reality for curators and artists in wartime Ukraine? What effect does it have on them?
Яка ваша буденність, пане Богдане? Бо в країні війна, і за новинами про президентів і про політику ми забуваємо, що є люди, які живуть своїм життям, які працюють. Яке життя куратора, власне? Розкажіть про свої дрони, пане Богдан. I was like nudging him to tell us about how you learned to fly drones.
Maybe he's not allowed. Maybe he's not actually allowed to talk about that. I don't know.
Maybe, okay. Бо може, якщо ви не можете, то накажіть.
Ну, я скажу в межах того, що я можу сказати.
I will say what I can.
Sorry, can you repeat that, Olena?
He said, I will only say what I'm allowed to say.
Yeah, absolutely. That's interesting to know. So I guess what you're saying is that artists and curators see themselves as part of the war effort.
Коли почалася війна, я через півроку зголосився на фронт.
After 6 months when the war started, I have subscribed. I went to the recruitment office and recruited myself.
Але перед тим я пройшов курси безпілотних пілота без квадрокоптерів.
And I went before that to a short course on how to pilot a quadrocopter.
Але мене завернули через проблеми з серцем, бо я гіпертонік.
I have been turned away because I have a high blood pressure, so I have some heart issues, chronic, so I was turned away.
Коли в мене гинуть друзі, вони гинуть кожного тижня.
But when my friends die, and they die sometimes each week or month.
В мене є бажання знову піти туди, тому що вікове обмеження і обмеження хвороби зняли, тому що не вистачає людей.
I want to go back, and I want to insist that I should go. And now in Ukraine, they have lifted a lot of health requirements because it's a 4th year and we are short of people.
Але я розумію, що технології війни пішли вперед. І ніхто квадрокоптерами не воює, а воюють FPV-дронами.
But the thing is, when I came now, is that what I realized, okay, if I go back with my quadrocopter skills, they're going to turn me away because this is irrelevant. This is very last century technology, apparently, after these 4 years. Now the war is fought with FPV drones. FPV drones.
І я просто розумію, що мені ще треба скілів. Тому я скачав собі цей симулятор. І я пробую злетіти.
And I'm trying to fly.
Це така реальність, що...
This is the reality. It's funny, but this is the reality. Yes.
Yeah, I remember when we spoke before, you were talking a lot about immediate emergency protection of public works of art that were being sandbagged, etc. We saw pictures of these, and also the movement of art, as you say, into Poland, away from that. One other little question that is related is, would it be? I mean, Olena, you were saying that you've been to Lviv, presumably during wartime, from Turkey.
Yeah.
Did you feel any danger? Can people still go? I guess Lviv is further west than, say, Kyiv, but is it a safe place for people to visit these galleries from outside of Ukraine?
No, yeah, my husband went many times. He's a New Zealander, so and we have a teacher. Well, I'm now located in New Zealand. So we're with the families, my husband's parents, for family reasons anyway. But there's a local teacher here from New Zealand who working at the moment at one of the Kiev schools as a principal, and he came back talking at school about that how he works and that how people are going to the shelters and everything. My husband been many times in Kiev. It's the main reflection is that it is surreal how it is the war in because it is 21st century war in Europe we're talking. That's very different from what you see about Gaza. And I'm not trying to make it less important, but that's different. And in what you see in Ukraine, he said, it's literally all the industry working because the economy must go on. And not even working, but thriving because people need to have money. So they need to pay taxes and they need to have a budget, you know, for all of that. And so among that, there's also war. There's air raids in the night, and there's from time to time, I mean, now it's even more often with after Trump that the, you know, bombardments are happening. But he said, okay, but people wake up in the morning and they go to work. Or like we're talking with Bohdan, he will go to work. And then in the night, he might go to the shelter. And it's a little bit surreal situation where like someone was describing like the teacher was describing like you can see the soldier was grabbing almost kind of comical in the way. He was in the trenches and he's running to get his McDonald's delivery by the drone, and you know, that kind of thing. So it's a combination. It's a 21st century battlefield where as a lot of technologies involved and very specific, all these flying machines and robots and demining dogs. It's almost like a movie scene with people also with McDonald's or expensive restaurant things, and it's all very mixed up.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to say to the listeners is that we have this wonderful BBC program called Ukrainecast. It's like a kind of podcast, and it's quite regular, and they continue to do that good work. But I think that the number of people listening to it has really gone down, and I would encourage people to listen to that just to hear. One of the things that I find when I listen to that is there's something about the Ukrainian people. They rarely seem to get, I think a lot of other people for some reason would get very bitter and obviously angry, almost irrationally angry. The Ukrainian people seem to be very rational about this and just wanting to be positive about what they're doing in the war. Does that kind of make sense to you? It's something very, very commendable and admirable, I find, about Ukrainian people, that they're not going to resort, if you like, to the enemy's apparent hatreds. They remain loving people and just wanting this war to end. Without getting kind of like, does that make sense to you? That's what, because there's a lot of interviews on this Ukraine cast, and I'm always very, very impressed at how people can get very upset, obviously, if their loved one dies, and so on. And there's been a lot of that, but they never kind of they always respond in a positive way.
Well,
Not
people,
they're never we're going to give up. You know, and I think the British character in war, because my dad fought in the, you know, was involved in action in the Royal Navy. You know, I think it was a similar spirit there.
yeah. Well, I think you're right. Yes, I wouldn't. I don't think, you know, our people as some sort of different from any other people, but I think a lot of work has been done in the beginning. There are two things, in my opinion, but maybe Bohdan will add something. Is that it was a very correct leadership from the very beginning for the people who are angry, frustrated, and afraid. We have a multitude of charitable organizations at the moment, just myriad, like I can't name how many. And banks have specific programs that are called jars or envelopes. And then whenever there was a death or there was a bombing or something, and people wake up and they're very angry and say, if you're angry, donate. And when they fill up these jars, you know, with money, they would bind the drone. These people, we're going to get retaliation. So it keeps them going. There's a lot of charity work as well, kind of where you can, when you can direct your anger to, and it was all of us, instead of just being angry at Russians, and that's just useless, really, you know.
Yeah.
and then we just decided that this anger, I think, builds the country. So that anger goes into what Bohdan is doing. He
Hmm.
can't go to the front line, but
Mm.
instead he can build a fantastic, and so all that anger is going to a productive way. And the second, it was the initiative of the wife of Ukrainian President Olena Zelenska. She has a huge initiative on mental health,
Hmm.
enormous, and this is a state funded program called How Are You,
Mm.
where they run Instagram channels, all sorts of informational. There's a free chat bots, whatever you can at any moment access free of charge, talk to a specialist. So that was it, it was very helpful. There was a lot of explanation of about validation of the feelings of people and everything. That it was just was a massive public mental health therapy.
Fantastic.
So these
It
two,
must, I mean, particularly for kids, as
absolutely.
so I don't know. Again, this is something we could talk about for a long time. So I'm aware of the time. So I just wanted to ask both Bohdan and Olena, well, to thank you for being so open, and it's just been so interesting hearing from Bohdan about the artistic culture and how it's thriving and responding to these externalities, if we can call it that. Shouldn't really be anything to do with the art world, but we know that they are. So I just like to ask what kind of final thoughts you might like to leave with our listeners.
Пане Богдане, фінальні. Ваші слова, що б ви хотіли сказати
I
слухачам?
think I will try to English.
Huh.
We live in the era of the last humanism, where in incredibly fragile world can be saved by empathy and attention to the smallest. The focus of Ukrainian contemporary art speaks to this. Please collect Ukrainian art because it is an investment in peace, I think.
Lovely, thank you. Olena, do you have anything to add?
I just wanted to thank you for hosting us again, and it's a great pleasure. And thank you very much for, as you said, the interest declining, and that's very natural. I think. I mean, it's been going for 4 years. People, I mean, there are a lot of, I mean, everyone has their own problems, right? So, you cannot really be everywhere anytime. So, thank you so much for spending this precious time with us and giving us a voice to speak and talk about us.
No, you're obviously very welcome. I have a lot of emotional investment in yourself, Elena, as being one of my dissertation supervisees at some point, but also your great work and interest in bringing what's happening in Ukraine, and particularly in the art world, to outside of Ukraine. And I totally get where you're coming from, that you don't want Ukrainian art to be seen as some kind of exotic element.
We don't know. Like if it's what we are trying exotic, it's only from my understanding, it comes as exotic because at the moment in the times of war, it's really, as Bohdan said very correctly, that it is the drama of the situation that
Mm,
emphasizes the white and the black, this chiaroscuro
mhm.
effect, and you can see the meaning behind a lot of works. And so we do have, as Vedan said, contemporary art is, Ukrainian contemporary art is returning to humanism, as returning to
Yes.
empathy, is returning to the humans, because we are losing people, and we see the value
Sure.
of that, and we see the value of a massive effort where just I don't know, like we're nothing else matters but just the
Yeah.
relationship between people.
And I think that's a lesson that you can teach the rest of the world is.
That's
Uh,
exotic. That is very exotic, it appears, in our
but
times.
but exotic in a good way. There's no problem with that. It's different. It's different from our experience for not good reasons, but for very human, earthly reasons. So it's really good to be reminded of this, I think. So that's great. And speaking of losing people, I just wanted to. I haven't kind of done this publicly, but I just wanted to kind of almost like dedicate this episode, well, A, to the people of your own country who have lost their lives, in the war, and may I say, people who are fighting on the other side who maybe don't necessarily want to be fighting. And I know that there's a lot of relationships historically between Ukrainians and Russians. I don't think we should forget those people either. But I also wanted to dedicate the episode to the loss of Koyo Kuo, the curator of next year's Venice Biennale, who died just last week, very young age, quite shockingly, of cancer. I've had experience of that and your father, Olena, as we were talking about before the episode started. So, I think I just like to remember Koyo Kuo as well, the African future curator of the Biennale, and let's hope that anything she was planning and her legacy will somehow remain in the Biennale themes for next year. So on behalf of all the listeners, I'd like to thank you, Olena and Bohdan, and may your good work continue. And I would add my own support to have a look at Ukrainian art and, purchase it if you can as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for talking.